So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our update from our stalwart and consistent supporter of our town halls and always willing to share what's going on at the NCUA. It's the Eastern Regional or Director of the Eastern Region. Regional Director of the Eastern Region, right, John? Is that correct?
I always say Eastern Regional Director. I don't even know if that's right.
I always see. So we just want to, again, John, thanks for making the time to be here. You've been more than willing to more than most would be willing to spend time with our credit unions and just give us an update on kind of, exam priorities, what's new now that we're into the new year. Kind of exams are starting to roll out, and there's been a lot of uncertainty, I think, in the marketplace. So it's a great time to get people caught up on what's going on and where you all are at. So without further ado, I will just turn it over to you. If you want to go ahead and share, I'll jump off screen. A reminder to everybody that's on the webinar, we will be making these slides available to you along with the recording after. But if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will address them as it goes. If you want to do anything anonymously, you can do that as well. So we're more than willing to take your questions and we can ask them of John. So thanks a lot, John.
Absolutely, John. All right, I'm going to throw my slide deck up here on the screen. And let's see where I'm at. This says that you guys can see my screen. I don't know if that's correct or not. Can you?
John, you might want to blow that up a little bit because it's coming through as just your the PDF.
Hang on, let me go with a different method here. Let's see. Just a second. Let's try this version. And let me get my I'm sorry, I'm looking for this is why I have people. I'm just letting you know. Let's see. They're used to all right, because we've updated our I think that was it. There we go. Is that better?
You got to reshare, I think.
Oh crap. All right, hang on. Come on, John. This is like suspenseful. This is great. Not really. Hang on. Okay. Let's see. One more time. Get my zoom up. And now, is that any better?
But I'm not seeing you share anything.
Dag nabbit. All right.
I can go ahead and pop it up if you'd like, John. If that
actually, that would be helpful, John, if you can go from your end, because I sent you what I had and you were going to share it anyway with everyone out there. So I'll let you, but I can actually start chit-chatting a while John's putting it up. So thanks everybody for coming out. This is always a great opportunity for me to get with you. You made that look way too easy, John. I'm just telling you now, it's ridiculous. It took me 5 minutes and I couldn't get it. This is always like coming home for me. I love all my leagues across the region, but this one is always near and dear to my heart because I grew up in Baltimore. I'm a Marylander by residence and spent almost all of my life in Maryland. I was an examiner in the Baltimore district, so I know many of the credit unions that still are around since my day. And I just look forward to the opportunity to always interact with you because you are what's going on and what our job is about. So as we go along, John mentioned, please ask questions, put stuff into the chat, and John and I can interact on what those are as we go along as well. So what I want to do, John, if you want to go to the next slide. This is my big disclaimer. We're told this by our public affairs office. what I'm going to express to you today are my opinions and not necessarily those of NCUA and the board. So I want to make sure I tick that box. Keep rolling, John. So this is the structure of the region's executive team. And the reason I like to put this up is so you can see who the associate regional directors are. They are essentially the equivalent of a vice president. If I'm the president of the region, they are the vice presidents of the region. And they have all of the supervisory examiner and the special actions teams underneath of them. So if you ever have an issue, I always ask you first to talk to your credit union or talk to your examiner about it. And if you can't get it resolved there, then you elevate it to their supervisor, which is the supervisory examiner. And if that doesn't work, then the next stop is the associate regional director. And in fact, once you get past the SC in terms of a concern that you might have, at that point, my suggestion to you is maybe to consider writing a letter to me that I can get with my associate regional directors about and have them work with you. I know that sounds a little bureaucratic, but I like to follow our chain of command, because if there is ever a formal complaint or appeal submitted, I have to be in a semi-independent decision-making role. So I try to follow that chain of command. So Rebecca and Wendy are the ones who would be most of the times involved with you and the SE groups. Mike Ryan handles our special actions division and our specialist. So if an issue ever arises there, Mike is the right one. John, if you want to flip to the next one for just a second. So this is going to be an outline of the region, just to kind of give you a sense of where we are. So we're the Eastern region, geographically the smallest, but in terms of credit union numbers and most other metrics, number of employees, we are the largest. So we have still heavy concentrations in the states that we do have. We used to have Ohio, but on January 1st, that went over to Southern region to help balance out the numbers a bit between the three regions. John, if you want to keep moving, again, that was just where we were. So I'll start with the supervisory priorities in the region. So there are 6 total. So these are the first 3: interest rate, liquidity, and credit risk. And if you go to the next slide, John, then we talk about fraud, information systems, and consumer financial protection. So if you look at the letter that the Chairman Harper sent out to all of the credit unions in early January, these are the 6 priorities that he had. And before I get into those, I did want to talk for a minute. I don't have a slide on this one, but I did want to talk for a minute about what to expect from your examiners in 2023 compared to the last few years. We are officially at our steady state of post-COVID world at NCUA right now. I'm sure there'll be additional tweaks of things that we will do as we go through 2023 and into 24. But right now we are back to an on-site mode, or what I actually term it a hybrid mode. And if you've all heard me speak before, you know that I've kind of expected that this is where we were going to land, where we would not be doing 100% virtual exams in most cases, nor 100% on-site exams anymore either. And right now we're leaving it up to the examiners and their teams to determine what the right mix is for on-site and off-site work on the exams. Some of the exam teams in your places, you will never see some of those examiners. They may be working 100% virtually. You may have some who are running the teams there virtually the whole time during the on-site piece, and then some who are in and out. But it really depends. It's case specific, depending on your ability to provide information electronically and your comfort in that environment with us, versus you've got a lot of systems and paper copies of loan files and things where we need to be there to look at them. So it's really going to be a mix from exam to exam, but we do have this hybrid mode now that we are operating in. And my expectation, as I have laid it out to my staff, is that our examinations will not be sitting open for months anymore, because we're in a world where we can go to the credit unions to get our information. So extremely long, extended examination contacts that are lasting many months was an unfortunate part of the COVID environment that we were in, but that doesn't exist anymore. So my expectation for staff is that they will be on site to get what they can't get electronically. So again, case specific on which ones we go to and not, and how long we're there. And that'll be a conversation also with you and the exam team, because I know many of your offices are now in a largely teleworking environment or a virtual environment, and we need to be respectful of that as well. So that's a little bit on the exam priorities. I'm sorry, what's coming in terms of what you should expect from seeing and not seeing your examiner this year. So John, if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to do a little bit of a rundown of the priorities. So the first one on the list is interest rate risk. And again, if you've heard me talk to you in the last year, this has been one of the top priorities that I've been hitting on. Interest rate risk, our interest rates have been rising pretty consistently and at a fairly rapid pace over the last year. That's done a lot of things to credit union balance sheets. And, you know, we always preach and hope that credit unions keep somewhat of a balanced approach in what they have in their portfolio in terms of concentrations of different credits and asset products and investments, a variety of yields to hopefully allow you to move up and down with the yield curve. But that isn't necessarily always the case. And interest rates over the last decade before 2022 have been in a fairly low environment and declining for years. So many of your assets, even if you try to keep a balanced approach in your structure, you're going to be at the low rate of the interest rate environment and have a lot of assets on your books that are just low yielding and have lost market value because of what's happened to interest rates. So John, if you flip to the next slide for me. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide because I think this is an important one. I've heard that credit unions, and particularly larger credit unions, are having a lot of conversation with their examiners now on these points and topics. So I wanted to spend a few minutes here exploring this a little bit further of what my folks are looking for when they come into your credit union in terms of interest rate risk review. So the assumptions that you use and the related data that supports those are a big part of what my team should be looking at when they come into your credit union. Assumptions are just that, they're assumptions. They're subject to different opinions and ways to slice and dice it. And that sometimes turns into the rub between the examiner and credit union officials. Who's right, who's wrong? I don't know that either one is ever right or ever really wrong. It's what is most reasonable given the facts and circumstances of the environment. I always said as an examiner that the only thing I know about our assumptions, mine and yours, are they're wrong. It's just a matter of how wrong. So, you know, we're always looking for that support and documentation backing up the assumptions. And the hope for us is that the assumptions don't just appear because it's what makes the balance sheet look least risky. That's not the right approach. And if that's the approach, then you'll get a lot of pushback from us on that subject. And that goes into the next point, which is, you know, are you modeling your balance sheet risk, the interest rate risk exposure? The next one is, are you talking to your credit union officials about the results and making joint decisions on what should happen next? So, you know, taking it from let's input the assumptions to what's the output that we're getting? Are we, let's talk about that as a management team. And are we proactively making adjustments to mitigate the risk that we see? Unfortunately, one of the things on this last one that I see happening way more frequently than I wish I have seen is when credit unions get to their limits or they start to breach their risk tolerance levels, unfortunately, what usually I'm seeing way too much is all we do is raise our tolerance levels without necessarily any additional analysis or information. So if we've set a certain risk tolerance for declining net worth in a rising rate environment, if we breach that, instead of adjusting the balance sheet, we just change our standards. And if that's well supported with additional analysis on why those new standards make sense versus the old ones that we've already breached, then things are good. If you don't have that backup information and you made the change just because you hit it, that's going to cause concern for us and end up in additional conversation and maybe a finding or recommendations to you. So wanted to hit the interest rate risk first because that's sort of the thing of the moment. John, if you go to the next one, we'll talk a little bit about liquidity risk. Now, liquidity risk and interest rate risk usually go hand in hand. They play off of each other. The concerns in one area normally originate because of something else in the other. It's like a seesaw a little bit. So on the liquidity risk side, a few things that we're seeing. Because interest rates are rising, the prepayment on loans is slowing down, and on the mortgage-backed investment products you own are slowing down, which reduces cash flow a little bit. That's not really been the major concern I've seen so far. And before I get to what I think the major concern is in this area, the second bullet on this page deals with sort of the unknown. We've never been in a post-pandemic environment before. So this is new to all of us. It's new to NCUA, it's new to you. And what's going to happen to the share influx that occurred during COVID, which was extreme and unexpected. That is one of the concerns that we have at this point. And are you modeling share outflow at a higher level?
John, I don't know if
we may not grow much in the future, but the money we have, we're not going to lose. That's one of the concerns that we have as we go forward of wanting credit unions to spend a little more time modeling this information and kind of stressing your balance sheet a little bit. What if we had a 10% runoff of shares in a year? 20%. I'm just throwing a number out. I'm not saying what it should be, but pushing the envelope and seeing what your stress point is. How much can you absorb in share runoff and still have a strong net worth position and earnings position? Those are the kinds of questions that we're looking for answers to when we come in to see your credit union. John, if you want to flip to the next slide for me. So I've talked a little bit about some of this already, but let's run down some of the things my examiners are going to look for when they come into your credit union. I already talked a little bit about the first bullet, but let's hit that a little bit more because that's one of the major concerns of things we're seeing now. Because of what happened in the dramatic and rapid increase in market rates in a really short period of time, there's been a lot of loss in value in the share or the investment portfolios of credit unions. So credit unions that look on the surface as being very liquid because they have a lot of investments that they could sell off really aren't liquid in a lot of the instances because there's such a market value decline in the investment portfolio that you're sort of stuck. Am I going to make the decision to make a major sell-off and take an actual loss on investments, or can I ride out the wave, hope for the best with holding on to the shares we have and not have to liquidate investments and take the loss and let them hold them till they mature? That's a tough question and part of the modeling that you all should be doing at this point. Again, let's run a few scenarios on shares, holding what we got. Are we in good shape? 10% runoff, 20% runoff. It's just an example. And what would your actions be if you had to hit those? What's the result on your balance sheet? You got to sell these things and realize losses. What's our net worth look like? What's our remaining liquidity look like? Is it better to borrow the funds and hold on to the investments so you don't realize losses? These are the proactive decisions and conversations we're hoping to see in ALCO minutes as you progress through 22 and now into 23. I hit the second one already on doing some modeling. Talked about cash flow projections a little bit already with what's coming in, slowdown in prepayment speeds on that impact both portfolio you're holding on loans as well as what you may have invested in participation loans that you own, modeling those based off of the maturity and the structure and the rates that are there in your portfolio. And I guess the other big one that we look at in this area is your contingency funding plans. What do you have in borrowing capacity? Is it really available to you? For instance, there are some of the lenders out there that credit unions have relationships with that when the going gets tough, they sort of disappear. And that's one of the things you need to sort of be aware of. What are your collateral requirements in order to tap your lines? How much do you have to put up in order to get into the borrowed funds? Modeling that interest rates are still rising when you need to get to that, and maybe the value of your loan portfolio and investment portfolio is declining, so you need to put up more collateral in that situation. So that, again, those are the stressors and the flex points that you should be looking at and considering as you go forward. John, if you want to hit the next one, I think we're in. Yes.
John, just had a quick question. Somebody had put in a question here, and I'm not quite sure. I'll just read the question, but it was, as liquidity has tightened across the industry, and you talked a little bit about this, but the question was, are you concerned as you go through interest rate risk, liquidity risk? But if you're so concerned, I think this goes back to what happened and we saw back in probably 2010, 11, 12. And is there going to be an expectation for credit unions to kind of liquidate positions to lift that liquidity?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think what I've told my staff is there is no cookie cutter answer to any of this. Each credit union's balance sheet and management team needs to kind of manage their way through it. And I've told my teams to not direct any of this. Ask the credit union to come up with a plan if they don't already have one and provide that to us so we can have conversation on it, but don't be directive in how you approach the liquidity and the interest rate risk. Let the credit union solve it. But if they're not solving it, our job is to kind of require some level of analysis on it. So I'm kind of punting on this one a little bit,
okay.
But I don't want to be the trigger for a liquidity event. I don't want my staff being a trigger for a liquidity event for you or for the industry. Right. One of the good things that's happened with this, with the corporates now under the new regulatory structure that we put in after the last financial crisis, seems to have held up really well in this current environment. The ONE's office, the National Exam Office, supervises them, and we get regular updates as the regions on what's going on with the corporates, and they're in really good shape. They have seen spike in activity, but nothing dramatic, nothing that's going to in any way, it looks like, stress them. Certainly not to the levels of the craziness that we saw back in the 2000s. But there's uptick. There's credit unions tapping into their lines and pulling some of the investments, but that's normal. That's what they're there for, right? The corporates are there to provide that resource, and that's what they're doing, and that's part of the system that we've built to have in place, and it's working effectively. So hopefully that answers some of that.
Great, thanks.
Sure. John, if you want to hit the next one. So interest rate risk and liquidity are the things I think you're dealing with right now as credit unions. The next thing that normally sort of drops as part of economic challenges in the country is credit risk. Thankfully, up to this point, we really haven't seen that take hold. But if history is any indication, when you go through a rising interest rate cycle, it usually leads to rising unemployment, and rising unemployment leads to people being stressed with their ability to pay their loans, which then starts to cause concern and problems for credit unions in terms of collecting on loans, and loan losses rise. Again, we haven't seen that at this point. And this is sort of an interesting environment with what interest rates are doing, because I thought if I would have given this presentation 2 weeks ago, felt like we were at a pretty good place with the Fed sort of flatlining on interest rates, feeling like inflation was under control. But what's the current job reports is jobs are still growing. And that's going to lead to further concern, I think, at the Fed level on inflationary pressure, which could lead to more interest rate risk increases. So the cycle for interest rate risk and liquidity risk could still be happening, but I think that delays the credit risk impact further than where I would have thought. I was guessing second half of 23 is where we start to see some more challenges on loan collection, but I don't know that that's going to be the case at this point. But again, post-pandemic, how much of the job market and current economic is just post, the hangover from COVID, nobody really knows. So this is going to be sort of a historical period in terms of working through this. So I don't think you'll see anything unusual from our examiners, anything really different than what we normally look at in the credit risk area, but I threw these up here anyway. We're always looking at your loan programs, existing and new, policies, procedures, controls, testing the sample of loans. As you go through, and if in your field of membership, you've got higher levels of layoffs or other things, and maybe parts of the industries that you're working on, are you developing any kind of monitoring practices? Are you making adjustments to your loan programs? Have you thought through workout strategies for borrowers who may be adversely impacted by layoffs? Those are the kind of things I think further down the road. But I think right now, knock on wood, we're in a pretty good spot. But I do still anticipate that this will be a challenge for us as we go forward. John, if you want to hit the next one. So this is an interesting one, fraud. We've seen spikes across all three regions, nothing crazy. Tends to be smaller credit unions for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part. Credit unions that don't have the ability to segregate duties because it's a 1 or 2 person shop. And those situations became more problematic during COVID because as NCUA, we were not going on site to credit unions. To be able to monitor and see real-time transactions and original source documents that supported the transactions in our reviews. And now that we're back on site, which we started in the fall of 22, we are seeing more instances of either fraud and or I use the word competency concerns, where credit unions have lost some of their employees during the COVID period, retired, quit, found new careers, and haven't necessarily found great replacements in all cases. And it's led to some record keeping challenges and problems that a lot of credit unions are trying to get through. One of the other kind of weird things or unusual things that happened during COVID is particularly smaller credit unions were having a hard time getting audits done. There were a lot of auditors that either that are smaller in size who either retired, left the industry, decided not to do them anymore. So we had a lot of we had a chunk of credit unions that were not able to get timely audits done. So when you add the inability to get audited on top of the lack of segregation of duties, loss of some competent employees, we've got some challenges in some of our small institutions right now. Thankfully, though, it has been the smaller ones, though, you know, we don't ever want to lose any credit union for those reasons, but we've had a fair number that we've dealt with already late 22 and early into 23. We do have this new management questionnaire that'll be part of each of your exams now. Send it to you as part of our pre-planning. It's sort of a checklist of things in your internal controls, segregation of duties, overlapping family members as employees and officials, and a whole bunch of other topics that we ask you to sort of address and send back to us. And it helps us set up our exam scope for the internal control and accounting area. So that's something that if you haven't seen it yet, you'll see that in your 23 exam. John, if you want to hit the next one. So this just talks a little bit more about the management questionnaire that we ultimately ask the CEO or another senior official to kind of attest to and sign. And we use the answers to that to help us scope our exam. So, and we do some test checking, fact checking, as we normally do with any questionnaire that we provide you to provide information to us. John, if you want to hit the next one. So information security, not really much of anything new here. We do have a new review tool that we're using that's a little more streamlined than the old version. Larger credit unions will probably see the impact of this more, but we do have some basic questions that we ask our examiners to inquire about with all of their examinations. And we try to flex our understanding and our acceptance of certain risk in the cyber area to the size and sophistication and potential risk exposure or non-risk exposure of each credit union. So again, it's not a one size fits all. Each one's going to see something a little bit different from us. But really the things we look for, the things we look at isn't really going to materially change in 23. It's going to be consistent with what we've done in prior years.
John, with the change, right, as we come out of obviously the pandemic and things have shifted considerably between, right, being fully remote to some hybrid to now we seem that we're back to hybrid in a lot of cases or back in the office. Is there anything unique that you all have seen as you come out of the pandemic, especially when it comes to systems and cyber that is different today than it was before, that the examiners are looking at because of that, kind of working environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. So I think some of what we see now is a lot more teleworking, remote employee work than we saw pre-pandemic. So I think a lot of credit unions offered some version of that to segments of their employees. But I think what we see now, we have entire credit unions that are operating virtually now. So you look at those connections, right? What are the controls in place on the device that's in the person's home? You look at password, device access controls, and that connection line from the house, the VPN network that would connect to the credit union system, validating the employee as legitimate. And so I think that ramps up a little bit higher in this environment. And it's not lost to me that it's taken a while for credit unions to catch up in this area. And I'll give you an example. During COVID, we had a credit union conservatorship, municipal credit union up in New York, $4 billion operation that I theoretically was the CEO and the board chairman of during COVID and had to make their decisions. And when March 2020 hit, we had to make a decision. We couldn't stay in New York, which it's the credit union headquartered in Manhattan, needed to send people home, didn't necessarily have the full infrastructure for it. I took the risk, said, got to send them home. We got to keep operating them. So send them with what we have. The IT department did the best they could to outfit everyone, get us equipment, and create as much security at that time as we had. Truth be told, probably wasn't perfect at that point, but as the months went by, that became more of a focus. Okay, this is more of a mainstream thing. We're going to have some version of this forever. Let's tighten this down and make sure we have everything in place. So I lived what I'm saying to all of you now, from the real world perspective, but knowing none of it's perfect. But I think that's part of the focus now, is those connections, those virtual employees and remote employees, and how you guys are securing the data and information there. So that
Great.
would be one of the that would be one of the changes, I think, in recent years.
Great, thanks.
Sure. You want to flip to, I think I've got one more on the priorities list. So consumer financial protection, John, if you want to hit the next one. We tend to pick out a few different regs every year that we sort of zero in on. And this year, these are the 4 things that we are looking at. We're spending time on overdraft programs, truth in lending, fair credit reporting, and fair lending programs as well. And I'm going to zero in for a couple minutes on the overdraft protection, because this came up. John mentioned this in advance to me and got some more information from my team on it. It's one of the hot topics, right? It's out there. It's sort of a political hot topic as well. And some of you may, what I'm about to say, may already have been exposed to this piece, but it's also become a sexy class action suit alternative. So you got lawyers out there looking to make money. If you're any of you are lawyers, please don't take offense to that. We're all trying to make a living. But it seems like they found some easy pickings in overdraft programs in financial institutions. And I just saw yesterday, one of the credit unions in the Eastern region got one of these notices from a law firm that they're about to be hit with a class action suit. Let's talk settlement. And so they take swings at these things, and they're seem to be making their rounds. This was happening a few years ago when I first became an RD, and it's now seems to be rearing its head again. And that, while we're not looking for that, it's out there, and you're going to have to put up with it and potentially respond to it if it comes at you. But overdraft protections, or overdraft protection, is one of the topics that we have, is one of our consumer compliance priority lists. I'm not going to read you all the things that are on there, but these are some of the areas that we're looking at as part of the examination: your policy and procedures, your oversight of the program, how you advertise these programs and deal with them on your website, your different calculation and settlement processes. So those back office pieces. And when we get to the Q&A part, I do have some more information on the things that I think we were going to be expecting to see from you, and we'll ask for as part of the items needed before, as part of the pre-planning for an examination. So I do have some information on that front. And heck, since we're talking about it here, let me pull it up and give you a sense for the things that we're going to ask for, because I think this is one of the questions John asked ahead of time. So when your examiner gets ready to come in and do your exam, and when they're looking at the overdraft program, here are the things that they're going to ask for: any overdraft policy you have, electronic funds transfer account agreement, your membership account agreement, rate and fee schedule, Reg E opt-in and opt-out form, any sample communications you have with members on your overdraft program we're going to want to see, any kind of reports or any kind of oversight monitoring that you do, any documentation you have on that front would be something we're going to look for. And a listing of the accounts that have been charged NSF fees, and the other types of associated fees with it. And if you're involved in the PALS program, for the short-term loan programs around paycheck protection, those are things that we're going to look for, and we will be sampling some of those loans as well, within a 6-month period before the exam date. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of information on overdraft. I don't think there's anything earth-shattering there, but it is a different area of focus for us, and one you might not normally be used to hearing your examiner ask about. So I wanted to give you a slide on it and a little bit of background information. So, John, if you want to hit the next one.
Yeah, and I would just say if anybody has any more questions or any other for clarification, if you could just put that in the Q&A and we can bring it up at the end
Yep.
too. Thanks.
Let's see, yeah, hit one more. So a couple of small non-priority updates, but a couple things I wanted to mention to you. So we do have a program that we kicked off in 2022 to help the minority depository institutions and small credit unions in general. So if you are an MDI or a credit union under 100 million in assets, we're doing some additional outreach to those credit unions outside the normal exam process to offer assistance, marketing plans, strategic plans, how to start up some of your new programs where we can provide insight and information, maybe helping you kickstart how to solve some of the exam concerns that we raised is another subject that we can address in these hours. And again, this is outside the exam and supervision program. We're more of a consulting role, if you will, when we charge these hours. So this is available to you. And if you're interested in this type of assistance, please let your examiner know. They know we have hours that can be allocated and they would love to help you. So feel free to tap them if some of this concept rings helpful to you, and we can certainly provide that assistance. John, if you want to hit the next one. And I've been asked as a reminder to let you know that anytime your credit union wants to record their exam exit meeting with our examiners, please feel free to do that. If the state has any particular laws in terms of disclosure, that's something obviously you need to follow with recording anything. But we do ask that if you record the meetings with us, that you actually provide a copy of the recording to us. And if you happen to get a transcript of it, not that that's a requirement for us, but if you happen to get a transcript of it, if you would please provide a copy to us as well. I like this approach because I think it takes some of the guesswork or some of the conceptions or misconceptions that occur during the meetings. Sometimes the meetings get a little contentious. Sometimes they're not necessarily the best received information from us, and information gets lost or things get lost in translation, and recording can actually help clarify things on the back end. And I know many of you use it just so you can actually put board meetings minutes together at the end of the meetings as well. So all kinds of uses for it. But again, we will not deny the ability to record meetings when you need to go there. Next one, John. Cecil, I think we've kind of beaten this horse a lot over the last several years. It is now in effect. For most of you, it started effective January 1st, but we did leave a bit of a caveat in there to give you still some additional time that if your financial reporting year starts after December 15th, you need to start complying with CECL at that point. So some of you may not already be using or subject to CECL. And if your financial reporting period again is later, that's the date you need to start complying with it. It's an accounting treatment, right? It's recognizing or how to recognize potential credit losses in your portfolio. And while it may be a hit to earnings and for some of you as you adjust into this, and it shows maybe a lower net worth ratio, as I was preparing this presentation yesterday, it kind of hit me. The thing we look for at NCUA is how much money stands between the risk in your balance sheet and the share insurance fund. At the end of the day, that's what counts. You take more risk in your balance sheet, you should be holding more capital to offset that risk and protect the insurance fund and other credit unions from having to pay for losses. In this case, I see this as a bit of a reallocation, because your allowance for loan losses is actually a form of buffer between your credit losses and the share insurance fund. So if money moves out of net worth and into your allowance for loan loss account, it's still the same level of buffer at NCUA to the insurance fund. It's just in a different bucket. So I wouldn't be overly stressed about this if I were you, and in terms of us coming in to look at this. John, if you want to hit the next one. That's just a little bit of information on where you can find some of the accounting alerts that we've sent out on the subject. And it gives you a little bit of an example there and a little more on your policies and things and what we look at. But I don't think there's anything, again, earth shattering there. It's just an accounting treatment. Your accountants are largely going to guide you through this. For the smaller credit unions, we provided a little bit of a Excel workbook tool that you can use to help with the calculation. So I feel like we've simplified it to the extent that we can, but I would be leaning on my external accountants largely for this. John, if you want to hit one more, I think that may be it. Yeah, so John's got the slide deck and he's got these links as well. Just on each of the subjects as you go through, I think there's one more slide, John, that gives you some of the additional resources that are available to you that talk about all of the things I talked about today and give you a little more backup information. So I leave that with John, and he can certainly share this entire presentation with you. And those are the updates I had, and the floor is yours. Love to hear from you, chat with you, see what other things I need to know about.
Thanks, John, as always. Thanks so much. So going back to overdraft, we had another question that popped up in overdraft. Are there specific adjustments to the overdraft programs that the examiners are expecting to have been implemented? And are there specific consumer complaint risks or concerns, consumer harm metrics that they're looking for?
So I looked through the questionnaire that my staff is going to be asking on the exams. I looked through that yesterday to see if I could glean anything along those lines. And we're not really prescriptive in that area. You know, complying with the law is sort of the big thing. I'm not an expert on overdraft protection or even our exam procedures in this area. So that might be a better question for someone to ask their district examiner ahead of the contact. But one of the things I am seeing a lot more of are credit unions taking more care, and banks taking more care in the level that they're charging for overdrafts. You know, they used to be $35, $40 for an overdraft. I think a lot of them have dropped that into single digit numbers or $10, $15. So I think you're seeing that a lot more, but we're not certainly requiring that. Anything that's that you're doing within the confines of the current law is up to you. We're not the moral police. We're not going to direct a document or resolution because we think you're charging too much. If it's within the limits of the law, it's completely a management decision. And if any of my people are coming across as the moral police, that's the conversations you need to raise further up the food chain so I can get involved.
So, John, one question that popped up as we were, one thing that popped up here was, I believe it was right when you were talking about CECL, are there specific adjustments to, or no, I just did that one, sorry. So the one question was, will their examiners be viewing certain balance calculation methods or settlement processes with suspicion? I'm not quite sure.
Good. Yeah, because that's a good question. I don't know technically the answer to that one, John. I know, you know, the way you calculate an overdraft and what doesn't meet, you can do it in different ways. And this goes back 30 years when I was an examiner. Most credit unions, even in those days, found the most advantageous way to help the member, right? If you're presenting 5 things that are going to be overdrawn, but you could clear 4 of them and say the big ticket item is the one that doesn't get cleared and only hit them with 1, or do you clear the big ticket item and hit them with 4 fees on the other end. You know, those are the kinds of things I think that we would be looking at. And again, as long as whatever you're doing is compliance with the law. But I think one of the benefits of credit union service is they're run by the members and they're owned by the members. So credit unions, as a general rule of thumb, are not out there in a profit-driven mode trying to just max this out. I think they generally are trying to help their members through their financial problems. So I don't see this as a major issue for credit unions as much as I do for some in the banking industry.
Excuse me. Thanks. So there's kind of 2 questions, are both related. It's talking about discussing information security, transactional risk. How closely are the examiners tracking the new requirements and assessment tools, and or are they going to be looking for them?
So I'm not sure I follow the question. When we do have a new cyber review tool that we've implemented for 2023 with a basic list of questions in it that our examiners are going to be required to answer. And it's like a lot of our questions. If certain things are triggered at a high level, then it drops down into more detail below that. But I'm not sure if that answers the question or not. I'm not sure what they're talking about with specifically tracking things.
Yeah, so I just
Okay.
didn't know if that person wants to just jump on in. I can,
Okay.
we'll wait a second, see if they want to jump on. There's Frank.
Hey, Frank. Unmute.
All right, Frank,
Hey, John. Hey, John.
how are
Hey,
you?
what's up?
Doing great. I was just looking at with all the tools like the ASET probably coming into play and some of that recent guidance that we had received from the NCUA. Always just trying to make sure my CIO is in the best position to be successful.
Yep.
So oftentimes we'll get this new guidance and then you'll get an examiner that says, yeah, I'm not really trained up on that and I'm going to use my old tool set, and we end up having to scramble.
Okay. Yeah, so Frank, the current set is the ISE, which was on one of the slides. I can't remember what information.
You're right.
Something examination, information systems. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but that's our current. So ACET for us is largely out. I think we still publish it as a tool for you guys, just if you don't have another way to evaluate your cyber health. We offer ACET as a way for you to do sort of a self-assessment, but that's not largely what we're evaluating anymore. We have this new ISE tool, which has kind of taken pieces of ACET, streamlined it down, so we should be asking less questions and less intrusive type things from you as we go forward. I don't know if that helps, Frank.
No, that does. That's
okay.
All right,
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. And then we've got another one, Tricia.
Hey, John. Hey, John. How are you guys?
Tricia.
Good.
Wonderful. I actually didn't need to raise my hand, but thank you for calling on me anyway. But I put it out there.
Nothing like calling somebody out.
I know. So John, clearly you're not the only one with technical difficulties today.
That's funny. Hey, that's good, man.
And information today. Time well spent. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, my pleasure. These are always great for me because I kind of get a sense for what is pressing you. And I tell my staff all the time, you know, the examination process is stressful for credit unions. It doesn't matter how big they are, how many they've been through. We're the federal government coming in to evaluate your operation. And that in and of itself, by its very nature of the relationship, causes stress and anxiety. So if there are things that I can learn along the way to help you navigate it, to help them understand your concerns, that's why I love these sessions. And I always say yes whenever John or any of the leagues ask, is to get an opportunity to talk to y'all directly and see if there's things that we're doing that are causing unintended consequences too. that happens all the time. So I'm trying to stay ahead of the curve a little bit.
All right, so last call for questions. Seems like, John, we're right at an hour, maybe a couple
Man.
minutes early. That'll be a record. Not only was I early to the meeting, but I'll be done early.
If you add the 3 minutes of me trying to figure out how to share my screen, we're right at an hour now.
So, but again, John, I can't thank you enough. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to us. In case you don't want to reach out to John, I know we've had a great opportunity and relationship where, you know, we can bring some things up anonymously. Sometimes that makes it easier to do that way.
I do want to plug that for John, by the way, guys. You know, John is fantastic at presenting concerns and issues you raise to him and keeping your identities confidential. And he knows I don't even try to ask. I don't want to pry into who that is. But I always appreciate your sharing information and concerns with him, particularly when I start to hear it 2, 3, 4, 5 times. It's like, okay, I got a problem going on here. This is not an isolated one-off. I got something bigger. And then I can sort of dig with the circumstances and figure out from my end what's going wrong without exposing any of you. So I want to let you know that John's a great advocate for all of you and does a great job of sharing information. And hopefully he gets honest answers back from me too.
You know, John, one question that we talked about beforehand that somebody had sent up to me was about the S and Camel and
Oh yeah, that's right.
any impact or any changes or any trends that you've kind of seen with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this past year we took the old L, which was interest rate risk and liquidity risk, and we separated it into liquidity risk and sensitivity, which is basically interest rate risk. And we're not really seeing a trending change in overall Camel ratings, but the ability to break those apart, I think has shown me a couple things. One, it helps us hone in from a true risk perspective of where your risk lies. And hopefully it's more transparent to you as to what our concerns are or not in each of those areas. So I'll actually see, and I've seen some where because of the balance sheet structure and the environment, I'll see an L liquidity risk rating come in at a 3 and sensitivity come in at a 1 or a 2 versus the old, we would have blended the rating to a 2. And it wasn't necessarily going to tell you what the concerns were. Oh, I'm a 2 in L, so I got no problems, but maybe you do have liquidity challenges.
Right.
So I think I like it. I think it's more transparent to you as to what the concerns are and lets us hone in on problem resolution. So I guess in a nutshell, hasn't really changed the overall Camel results, but it has allowed us to really give accurate readings in those specific areas. So I'm a fan of it.
Well, good. Well, John, I think that's everything. Won't keep everybody. Want to thank everybody for staying engaged and being a part of this. Look for the next town hall. We're probably going to be doing a few more of these this year, really focused on, you know, what's the topic and what's key at that point. So we'll continue to do these, and I'm sure John will be a frequent guest as always, and just can't thank him. Thank you enough, John, for going all the way back to, it seems like hard to believe, 3 years ago, probably to almost a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
When
Yep.
you were part of the very first one. So thanks again. And thank you to everybody for joining us and all our affiliates. It's great to see you all, and have a great day.
All right. Have a good one. I'll see everybody.